Welcome back to WION World is One. You're watching Speed News with me, Vidur Kathuria. Let's get started. US-based rights groups say the death toll of Iran's protests has surpassed the 2,400 mark. US President Donald Trump said he was seeking accurate numbers on what he called significant killings in Iran and would act accordingly. But Trump declined to say what form any US response could take. US President Donald Trump took to social media to urge Iranians to keep protesting and remember the names of those abusing them, saying help is on the way. Meanwhile, an ongoing internet blackout is heightening tensions in Iran, where a lack of access to reliable information is adding to the turmoil sparked by weeks of widespread protests. Protests have erupted in several Iranian cities since late December over the sharp fall in the national currency, the rial, and long-standing economic hardships. Hours after US President Donald Trump urged Iranians to take over government institutions, Iran's national security chief Ali Larijani has called Trump and Netanyahu main killers of Iranian people. Larijani accused Washington and Tel Aviv of fueling unrest that has claimed thousands of lives as Iranian authorities intensify their crackdown on demonstrators angered by economic collapse and political repression. This comes after the US president cancelled talks with Iranian officials amid unrest that has killed over 2,400 people. Greenland and Denmark presented a united front before a high-stakes talks with top US authorities. Standing with his Danish counterpart, Greenland's Prime Minister said that his country chose Denmark and it will not be owned by the United States. Danish PM Mette Frederiksen echoed the same sentiment, adding that Greenland is not for sale. Talking about the upcoming meeting with the US, she added that they will discuss increased security measures on the Arctic island. Greenlanders said they hoped for a diplomatic solution ahead of the meeting in Washington between the Danish and Greenlandic foreign ministers and US Vice President J.D. Vance and Secretary of State Marco Rubio. The meeting comes after US President Donald Trump recently stepped up threats to take over Greenland, an autonomous territory of the Kingdom of Denmark. The US has designated Muslim Brotherhood branches in Egypt, Lebanon, and Jordan as terrorist organizations, citing their history of violence and in part what it called their support for Hamas. The move, formally set in motion last November, will introduce sanctions against one of the Arab world's oldest and most influential Islamist movements. Republicans and right-wing voices have long advocated for and considered terrorist organizations designations for the Muslim Brotherhood. Tightening its grip over Venezuelan oil exports, the Trump administration has filed for court warrants to seize dozens of tankers linked to the Venezuelan oil trade. Multiple suits have been reportedly filed in district courts, primarily in Washington, D.C. However, the number of seizure warrants filed and received remains unclear. In recent weeks, the US has seized 5 vessels. More action could reportedly unfold soon. Another report by news agency Reuters suggests that Venezuela has begun reopening some of the oil wells shut under US embargo. Accounts on the number of prisoners released in Venezuela continue to vary. Venezuela's top lawmaker, Jorge Rodriguez, said that over 400 people had been freed from prison as part of a process announced last week, intended as a gesture of peace. However, rights groups have said that the number of releases ranges between 60 and 70. While complaining about the slow pace and lack of information, Venezuela's Penitentiary Authority said that a total of 116 people had been freed from prison so far. A leading local NGO that works on legal support for detainees said at least 800 political prisoners were behind bars at the beginning of the year. Venezuelan authorities said they seized 6.85 tons of drugs in the southern state of Bolivar. Cabello said the seizure involved 238 packages containing 14,280 individual wrappings for a total weight of 6,850 kilograms. He said the operation also led to the seizure of 2 boats, including one that had capsized, and described this raid as part of Operation Soledad, carried out on January 5th in Bolivar. Cabello said as of yesterday, authorities had seized a total of 7,148 kilograms of drugs nationwide so far in 2026. He also rejected allegations of official involvement in drug trafficking. US President Donald Trump announced at a rally that naturalized immigrants who are convicted of fraud in the country may lose their citizenships. In his speech, Trump said the decision will affect any naturalized immigrant, but specially mentioned Somalia. The Somali community in US has become a frequent target of the Trump administration of late. It also runs a crackdown in Minnesota targeting what it claims is a large-scale public benefit fraud by state's Somali community. The administration has also ended temporary deportation protections and work permits for some Somali nationals. Temporary protected status shields migrants from deportation to countries deemed unsafe to return and grants them temporary work authorization. India's External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar held discussions with US Secretary of State Marco Rubio covering trade, critical minerals, nuclear cooperation, defense and energy. Both sides decided to remain in touch on important bilateral issues. In a social media post, the Indian External Affairs Minister described the talks with Rubio as a good conversation. The discussions revolved around a range of bilateral and strategic issues. A Hamas delegation is in Cairo to hold discussions on the Gaza ceasefire. The delegation will hold talks with the Egyptian side on completing the implementation of the first phase of the ceasefire, including the opening of the Rafah crossing in both directions. The Hamas delegation is led by the group's chief negotiator in Gaza truce talks, Khalil al-Haya. A statement by Hamas side said that the discussion will also focus on accelerating transition to the second phase, including the formation of the administrative committee and complete withdrawal of the Israeli forces from the Gaza Strip. The Israel Defense Forces has issued a statement saying that during operations in the southern Gaza Strip, the IDF troops killed 3 terrorists who had crossed the yellow line of the military ceasefire. The statement added that forces would remain deployed in the area and would continue operations to eliminate threats. On the same day, the Palestinian Ministry of the Interior in Gaza Strip issued a statement saying that Mahmoud al-Astal, head of the police investigation department in Khan Yunis, southern Gaza, was shot and killed. Sources say al-Astal was a key member of Hamas. A Palestinian armed group in Gaza backed by Israel claimed responsibility for the shooting. Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney has departed for China to discuss trade and international security. This marks the first Canadian Prime Minister's visit to Beijing since 2017, amid strained relations with the US over trade and security issues. Meanwhile, Chinese state media has called on Canadian government to set a foreign policy path independent of the United States, what it calls strategic autonomy. Canada has long been one of America's closest allies geographically and otherwise. However, Beijing hopes that Trump's economic aggression and now military action against other countries will erode that long-standing relationship. A South Korean court reportedly plans to deliver a verdict on February 19th in a case against former President Yoon Suk-yeol for his December 2024 declaration of martial law. South Korean prosecutors called for the death penalty to be handed down to Yoon Suk-yeol for his December 2024 declaration of martial law, which plunged the country into chaos. Yoon triggered a political crisis when he announced an end to civilian rule in December 2024 and sent troops to parliament to enforce it. But his attempt failed and he became the country's first sitting president to be taken into custody when he was detained last January. Yoon's criminal trial for insurrection, abuse of power and other offences linked to the declaration drew to a close after 11 hours of proceedings. Greek Prime Minister Kyriakos Mitsotakis held talks with some farmers' representatives for the first time after weeks of protests over farm aid delays and an EU-Mercosur trade deal. The Greek PM met a 21-member delegation of farmers who agreed to meet him in Athens. Many other farmers, however, declined to attend the talks. Mitsotakis' centre-right government, under fire over a farm aid corruption scandal, offered to farmers additional cuts in fuel tax, electricity cost and compensation to breeders. This in a bid to diffuse tensions after farmers blocked major highways and border crossings for weeks, disrupting travel and hitting some businesses. Government officials have said talks aimed to offer solutions to about 600,000 farmers, stock breeders, fishers and beekeepers. He added, however, that after 45 days of protests, blockades of roads and borders could not be tolerated. A powerful rainstorm swept across the Gaza Strip, flooding displacement camps and collapsing fragile homes. Gaza health officials reported at least 6 people died, including children. Heavy rains pounded Gaza overnight, inundating hundreds of tents and collapsing homes sheltering displaced families. The storm left scenes of chaos. Tents were torn from their stakes, some flying dozens of meters before crashing to the ground. Others lay crumpled in muddy pools as families scrambled to salvage what they could. The Budapest airport has now reopened after extreme winter weather brought operations to a halt. The harsh weather conditions grounded flights and caused major disruptions to travelers. Issuing a statement, the airport said it was temporarily closed due to black ice and extreme icing. The closure caused a backlog of delayed flights and a small number of cancellations for some travelers. The delays caused to worry about connecting flights. Airports in Prague, Vienna and Bratislava were also affected by weather conditions. The Vienna International Airport suspended all takeoffs and landings shortly when a fast-moving band of freezing rain coated runways, taxiways and service roads in a layer of black ice. Defrosting crews were deployed, but super cold drizzle refroze almost instantly, forcing a complete operational stand-down until midday. More than 120 flights were cancelled in the first 6 hours. Several long-haul services were halted to the United States and Asia. Many travelers found themselves stranded or rerouted through Munich, Frankfurt and Venice. Hungary's Lake Balaton froze almost completely in recent days, marking the first time the massive lake has frozen in the mild winters of the past decade. The lake is the largest in Central Europe and ranks amongst the continent's biggest freshwater lakes. Officials warn the ice remains dangerous despite its impressive coverage. Shoreline measurements show ice thickness between 2 and 9 centimeters, far below safe levels for walking or skating. Authorities describe the ice as life-threatening, with potential fissures and snow-covered weak spots that make the surface unpredictable. Residents gathered to witness the rare winter spectacle. While some celebrated the return of traditional cold weather, others expressed concerns about climate change and its effects on the region's weather patterns. Much of northern India remains gripped by a severe cold wave, with the weather department issuing alerts across several states as temperatures are forecast to fall further. According to the Indian Meteorological Department, New Delhi recorded its coldest January morning in 3 years on Tuesday, with the minimum temperature plunging to 3 degrees Celsius. This was 4 notches below the normal, while the maximum temperature during the day reached 21.6 degrees Celsius. This morning, the national capital recorded a minimum of 4 degrees Celsius. The cold waves are likely to persist for 2 more days. However, experts say they could have no impact on the rabi crops as they are well adapted to low winter temperatures. Residents of Russia's far northern Taimyr Peninsula celebrated the sun's first appearance after enduring 45 days of polar night. The return of sunlight was marked by the traditional Hero Circle dance, a ritual that brings together all 5 indigenous groups of the region. At this time of the year, the sun rises above the horizon for only a few minutes. Asian shares inched higher on Wednesday, led by Japanese stocks, as investors priced in the risk of a snap election in Japan that could unlock more fiscal stimulus. The Nikkei rose more than 1% to a record, while the yen slid to its weakest level since July 2024, reviving concerns over possible market intervention. Elsewhere, Asia markets were mixed. South Korea's Kospi hovered just above flat, while the Kosdaq slipped 0.14%. Australia's ASX 200 edged slightly lower. In China, Hong Kong's Hang Seng gained 0.35%. Benign US inflation data kept expectations for a steady Fed this month intact. Oil prices jumped more than $1 a barrel on Tuesday, with Brent and US crude climbing over 2% as fears of potential disruptions to Iranian crude exports overshadowed expectations of added supply from Venezuela. Traders are pricing in a geopolitical risk premium due to escalating unrest in Iran and warnings from the US about the situation, lifting oil towards multi-week highs. The rally lifted Gulf stock markets, where energy-linked shares also gained on higher crude prices. Despite the latest surge, the market remains watchful of global supply dynamics, including Venezuela's resumed shipments and broader geopolitical tensions. Gold surged to a record high as softer than expected US inflation data reinforced expectations of Federal Reserve rate cuts later this year. Spot gold briefly climbed above $4,630 an ounce, supported by falling inflation pressures and strong safe haven demand. Core US inflation cooled in December, increasing bets on easier monetary policy. Lower rates typically boost non-yielding assets like gold. Geopolitical tensions, concerns over Fed independence and renewed trade threats from President Trump added to market uncertainty. Silver also rallied sharply, touching an all-time high, while platinum was flat and palladium edged higher. Apple has unveiled a new subscription bundle called Apple Creator Studio, priced at $12.99 a month or $129 a year, as the iPhone maker deepens its push into paid services for creators, students, and professionals. The new bundle brings together Apple's top creative tools under one subscription, including Final Cut Pro, Logic Pro, and Pixelmator Pro, available across Mac and iPad. Apple said the package will also add premium content and a new AI-powered feature to its productivity apps, Keynote, Pages, and Numbers, while the digital whiteboarding app Freeform will receive enhanced features at a large scale. Spain's cabinet has approved draft legislation aimed at curbing AI deepfakes and tightening consent rules for images as European governments move to crack down on AI-generated sexual content. The proposed law strengthens protection for children and sets 16 years as the minimum age for giving consent to use one's own image. It also restricts the reuse of online images as well as AI-generated voices or likenesses without explicit permission. The reform directly targets artificial intelligence, declaring the use of a person's AI-generated image or voice for advertising or commercial purposes without consent to be illegitimate. Manchester City have taken control of the EFL Cup semi-final with Newcastle with a 2-0 win at St James's Park. New signing Antoine Semenyo opened the scoring for City early in the second half. Semenyo seemed to have scored a second shortly after the hour mark, only for it to be discounted. Ryan Cherki then added the second deep into injury time. Holders Newcastle will visit the Etihad for the second leg early next month. Scott Adams, the cartoonist who captured the soul-crushing absurdity of white-collar office life through his comic strip Dilbert, has died at the age of 68. His ex-wife, Shelley Miles, confirmed his passing. Adams had been battling aggressive prostate cancer.